Welcome to the broadcast, everybody. We are going to kick off with some light-hearted gaiety and some froth and bubble for the first segment of the show, but a warning that later on, for the second segment, we will be delving into heavier territory, my dears, and I will be going on a bit of a rant and one of my rambles, and I won't be in the most light-hearted of mood, but I'll leave that for later so that you can switch off if you don't care to hear that. But we'll kick off with some more gay affairs. First of all, I wanted to show you something that I discovered on the channel that I mentioned to you the other day, which shows off interior design, because a new video sprang up and it was of a Georgian house in Kent belonging to an interior designer who renovated this house, and a portrait popped up on one of the walls and it was Queen Victoria. And it really struck me. I thought it was a wonderful portrait in black and white, and it looked as if it was rendered in pencil. But it wasn't. Does anything strike you about this portrait unusual when you look at it? This portrait of Her Most Gracious Majesty the Queen has taken 4 years and 7 months to execute, and describes the history of her life, containing 173,000 words. And this was published to commemorate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee on June the 22nd, 1897. The image is demonstrating one of the uses of the technique of lithography, so well suited to the reproduction of texts, could be put. And the story of her life begins in the top left-hand corner of Queen Victoria's hair before the bonnet. Isn't it interesting, and a real testament to the skills of the lithographers of the day, if that's what they were called? And I also would love to read out a comment that came through with a tip. River, happy belated birthday to you from us here in the USA at Evergreen Home 1860. And this is why I'm reading it out, because she has an Instagram account that you might find interesting. We wish you a beautiful and healthy and fruitful year. You are a beautiful soul and I love your broadcasts. Well, thank you, my dear. Thank you for entertaining, hilarious and brilliant content. God bless. Well, I'm so glad you've been enjoying it, my dear. And I wanted to show off your home, which is really lovely. It's a pre-Civil War era home that was built in 1860 by H. Ensign, and it is an historical Francis Fuller home, and it is on the National Register of Historical Places, the NRHP. And as you can see, it is just chock full of curios and gems. There's a cabinet full of gems there. Wonderful. I'd have a great time rummaging around in there. At Christmas time, it looks beautifully done out in sort of Victoriana, I suppose, if you can apply that to the States, with the beautiful festive colours and adornments. It's a real passion project. It looks quite enchanting, doesn't it? And I see from your Instagram, my dear, that you are a bargain hunter, just like me, and many of the fruits in the basket. And lots of those things that look extremely fancy in your house are from the thrift and from the Goodwill and all kinds of places similar to our charity shops here in the kingdom, which is wonderful. You do that wonderful thing of mixing up those bargain treasures that you found, which is so satisfying, so much more satisfying when you scout it out yourself and have a lucky find with some of the more luxurious pieces. A wonderful blend. And I'd also like to say a quick hello and a thank you to Leslie and Maxwell and your husband Leslie. I don't know his name, but I've seen his picture. And lovely Maxwell, your doggy. But a sweet hello to you, my dear. You know exactly why. But also Leslie has sent me photographs of her home as well, which is equally beautiful in a very different style and a different way. So I'm full of admiration for all of you stylish fruits who keep me in the know and up to scratch on things. The King attended Sunday service this morning. It was reassuring to see him there looking in fine fettle and full of vigour at St Mary Mag's on Sandringham on this heavenly morning in the kingdom. It's been really quite glorious here. And yesterday the Queen presented the King George VI and the Queen Elizabeth Stakes trophy at Ascot, where she was wearing a dress that was called, wait for it, the Montecito. Oh dear, watch out, watch out. Let's hope that it wasn't spun by American Riviera Orchard. In fact, it wasn't. It was spun by Susanna London, so never fear. But it was a blue iris print shirt dress, very pretty. And she watched on as her horse competed in the Prince Margaret Stakes. Her horse is called Handcuffed. Oh, it's all come over a bit 50 Shades, hasn't it, my dear? Handcuffed. I wonder who named that horse. And she had a catch-up with the ex. Andrew Parker Bowles was there, having a day off from Annie Robinson. It's all so civil and so modern, isn't it, my dears? As for Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex attended a highfalutin business summit in the Hamptons, and she wore this suit by St. Agnes, a vest and trouser pant affair in beige. Surprise, surprise, because of course, do you remember? She was forced into wearing neutrals by the royal family, wasn't she? Because she didn't want to upstage Catherine, she daren't. So she had to blend into the background by wearing beige and neutrals that the rest of the royal family rarely wear on those kind of occasions. So she had to blend in by dressing up like a turd, and she did that many times, and she continues to do so, even though she's been released and her voice has been unsilenced. She's been unleashed into Montecito, but still she insists on wearing these neutral colours. Not that it was a disastrous look on her, I didn't think, close up. It looked all right close up. In one of the photographs, she actually looked pretty. Your split was Devon, and it looked like it suited her, but from a distance it was like a well-worn serviette. And yes, I know that napkin is the correct word, my dear, and serviette belongs to the déclassé. But go figure. She looked like a well-worn serviette, love. This G9 Ventures Summer Summit was hosted by the power broker Amy Griffin, and she arrived by private jet from Santa Barb's with entrepreneur Jamie Kern Lima, and she was pictured with Bobby Brown, the makeup artist, and her chum Misha Nonu, and she appeared to be in her element, looking like a soggy sail on a dinghy. This event was at the home of the hedge fund billionaire John Griffin, and she was able to rub shoulders with Gwynnie. Gwynnie was in town, Reese Witherspoon and Laura Dern, all of her rivals, and talk about rubbing shoulders with all of them. And she was literally doing that, rubbing up and getting in there with their shoulders, swinging them all about, my dear. Ooh, swinging them all about for the boys. But she was scenting. You know, as animals with the scent glands do in various places over their body, rubbing up and scenting them, my dear, saying, this is my new turf, this is my new territory, I'm the business girl in town, I'm the chief executive that knows what's key, and now I've arrived in the Hamptons. It's mine, Gwynnie, it's mine. And that alpha male husband of hers. So, Alpha, have you noticed how I todger in? Yeah, I todger here. I todger there. This Duke todgers everywhere. Well, we've had enough of his todgering, haven't we, my dear? Todgering and rogering. Oh, you think she's so alpha. Well, Meghan is the alpha, Harry. Work it out, boy. Since we last spoke, Tabloids on Trial actually aired. So in addition to my previous comments over the trailer, we haven't spoken about the fact that he was putting the late Queen's name in his mouth, wasn't he? Oh, Granny. He said, we had many conversations before she passed, and this is very much something that she supported. She knew how much this meant to me, and she's very much up there saying, see this through to the end. Actually, Harry, what she will be telling you from above is recollections may vary, just as she told you when she still lived and breathed on this planet and this earthly plane. Celestial the voices may be, but the word pattern remains the same. RMV. Recollections may vary. It still stands. Have you noticed how Prince Harry has adopted his grandmother deceased, Elizabeth Regina Mortuus, as his champion and his cheerleader? As if she is his personal mascot, sitting on his shoulder. Oh, it's me and Granny against the world. We're slaying dragons together. Just because she was silent at the Sandy Summit, which you told us about in Spare, your version of events, not the version, your version, just because she sat there mute, you didn't have to take that as her tacit approval. This is the thing with Harry. He reads between the lines and comes up with a scribble. Just because she sat there silent according to you, it doesn't mean that she was being held hostage or held captive by the furious Charles and William, as you described them. She was communicating with me, Meg. She was communicating with me telepathically at the Sandy Summit. Yes, they were raging at me, and Willie was making a dash for my beads to grab them off of my throat and hurl me to the floor. And Papa was in a vainglorious flap. But Granny, she sat there, silent, and transmogrified and transmuted messages to me. Oh, and I picked them up. And she was saying to me, Megs, she was saying to me, call your spawn, Lilybet, Harry, when she comes through. Call your spawn Lilybet, so that I may live through you, my favourite grandson, whom I'm championing. That'll rattle Papa, Harry, that'll rattle Papa. That'll really piss him off. Just because she had to sit there, in silence or nodding away at your expostulations every time you came running to her with your mischief. Oh, really, Harry? That's very interesting, Harry. Oh, Harry, that is called diplomacy. It does not indicate some sort of tacit approval for your schemes. It does not indicate support. And also, the late Prince Philip told Giles Brandreth on his deathbed that he regretted that you and your wife had turned the recent events of that era into a soap opera. That was how he described it. So spare us, Sussex. Spare us from this claptrap. Okay, I'm going to turn to more serious matters now for the rest of the show, continuing on from a theme from the previous broadcast. I'll start with a comment from I. Sabhe Pio. Excuse me on the pronunciation. Dear River, agree with you that violence and abuse of power is not justifiable, and we always need to get the context of the incident. The Manchester Airport CCTV is slowly coming out. The police were called in for an altercation involving two guys who then attacked the armed police before the short clip was widely circulated. Thank you for your comment. And this viewer is talking about the violent incident at Manchester Airport that I alluded to previously. We had already seen at that stage footage of a scuffle or an altercation of some kind that was involving a couple of young men. I believe they're aged between 19 and 35. This group of 4 men it was in total, but 2 main perpetrators. But 2 of them who happened to be non-Caucasian. They had been meeting their mother at Manchester Airport, who had flown in from Pakistan, I believe. And everything I say in this segment is based on what has been reported in the national media. For legal reasons, I will state that. But this altercation resulted in one of these young men being kicked in the head by an officer very hard, and some have described the action as a kick and a stamp on the head. It's there for you to see online. It was very disturbing to watch, for anyone to see, and out of context, contemptuous and unacceptable. But as I intimated in the previous broadcast, and many people suspected, there was more to the story. There was going to be more to the story. And I told you that we needed to wait until we'd been furnished with the full facts, which we still haven't, but we have a lot more now. Instead, what we had, and why I was grumbling away to you, because what we had was large mobs coming forward, which seems to be ever increasing every month, happening more and more, of people mobilising and organising as part of ethnic and religious communities. This time it was around Manchester, and this with their BLM placards calling out racism, jumping to the conclusion that first of all it's racism, and secondly that the chaps involved in this were innocent of anything, and screaming Allah Akbar, which is becoming commonplace. And all of a sudden a lawyer popped up to protect and defend these 2 poor men and the poor chap who had been booted in the skull, saying justice must prevail, and making all sorts of demands and describing it as an assassination attempt on their life. Well, surprise, surprise, all was not as it seemed. I was right, all was not exactly as it seems, my dear. Several comments came into me, by the way. Well, I won't say several, I'll say a handful, 3 or 4 I noticed, telling me that Allah Akbar, that cry, it only means God is great, Ritha. It only means God is great. A few said it's the same God. No, it's not the same God, my dear. And we all know what it means. We all know what it means. And anybody has the freedom to say it in this country, which is how it should be. There should be freedom to do as you will. We don't have the freedom to do as we will in other countries, do we? And other states, and in various religious states, and the religious states of Allah Akbar. We don't have the right to go there and impose our way of life on them. If we do, we get chucked off buildings, or we get imprisoned or tortured. And I'm not exaggerating. They come here and, it's mobs forming and criticising our way of life and our law. And I reject that it is the same God. As far as I'm aware, Allah Akbar was the battle cry of Allah. Forgive me if I'm wrong there, but I believe it was. And Allah has a quite different personality to that of Jesus, and certainly a very different history. And I'm not saying that to try and disparage every Muslim. The vast majority of Muslims that I know and love and have met are gorgeous people. But those Muslims that we all know and love and work with are those who have assimilated to our own culture and respect it and actually love it in many ways, and find this new attitude on the back of mass immigration at speed just as appalling and just as unsavoury. They don't want it either. No one cares what you do or say or pray to or shag, so long as you don't try to monopolise our culture. And when I say our, I mean both Britishers and those fruits of the Commonwealth that have gently come to join us over the past several decades. All of us together are resenting this mass onslaught of those who are hostile to our way of life. One of those might be a viewer by the name of Rhea Selam, who says, "Hi Zionist, Allahu Akbar simply means God is the greatest. No need to make it something else to deflect from what the so-called police in the UK did to that poor man in Manchester." I actually thought I was looking at IDF in Israel, torturing Palestinians, but it turns out the police brutality was in the UK. Ooh, how the West has fallen. No humanity left. Bye, Zionist. Ooh, I feel like Bob Marley. Well, thank you for that contribution, Rhea dear. We'll address your points in a moment. But you see, camera footage that comes from the body cameras of officers is very differently processed here in the kingdom to the way that it's processed in the States. It doesn't become immediately available, usually not until trial. And some complain about that. I'm actually very, very glad of it. I've become increasingly uncomfortable with the amount of body cam footage that there is out of there. I actually went through a phase, though, hypocritically, a few months ago, of watching again and again. Have you seen those YouTube channels? They pop up and they specialise in police body cameras, and they're huge. I mean, they get millions upon millions of views, and I can see why. They're quite addictive and quite riveting, and they're dealing with all sorts of ne'er-do-wells getting arrested in car chases. Some of them are really tragic and really heavy going. Car smashes and car wrecks and murders and things like this. Some of them are lighter felonies and lots of people on drugs and stuff. But I actually stopped watching them because I came to the conclusion that they felt exploitative, and I felt that it was a violation of these people's privacy. Yes, of course, many of them are nasty, nasty characters, but to have that material in the public realm for life, when a lot of these people are drunk, alcoholics, their life has been ravaged by alcoholism or drugs, they may go on to pay for their crimes and bitterly regret them. But to have them there and with their full names on display and in the video description things, I think is cruel. It's too permanent, it's too exploitative, and also I've noticed that it encourages a sort of performativeness in some of the officers. They've begun playing to camera because they know that they are being filmed at all times, and one can sense that they know it. I don't know. It's fabulous entertainment at times. I'm not going to deny that. A great deal of these criminals and are nasty individuals. But it doesn't feel right to me that they're all released to the public and so quickly. And that is why I'm glad that it doesn't happen here in the kingdom, although it probably will eventually, because people will start demanding it. But we hadn't seen any further footage because of this reason, because they're held back. But Manchester Evening News, I think it was, one of the local papers in Manchester, they sourced the CCTV of this incident, or part of this incident, and they furnished us with added context. You can find, by the way, this footage online. Manchester Evening News have a YouTube channel, and you can find the footage of this encounter there. So there had been an altercation between these boys' mother, who was arriving from Pakistan, between her and another male passenger. I believe there was a bit of a quarrel on the plane, and then in the baggage hall there was a further accusation that he banged his trolley into her, something like this. Anyway, her boys got wind of it when they arrived, and I think they had a go at this guy. No one's quite sure what happened there, but the situation escalated, and that's when the police were summoned to intervene. One officer attempts to arrest one of the boys, and one of the boys resists. And this is what you see continually on these body cam footages from America, for example. They continually resist arrest and then wonder why they get into deeper and deeper trouble with more charges as they go along. You simply just don't do that. I was always taught to respect the law. I always have. I've never been in trouble with the law. Not saying I've never been naughty, but I've never got caught. And I've never given any jip to the police. And although I know that there are plenty of bad apples in the cart in police forces, absolutely, up and down the country, in my personal experience, I've never had anything less than delightful service and experience from all our emergency services throughout my entire life, be it the fire brigade, ambulances, paramedics, or indeed the police. They've always been an absolute delight to me, so I've got high respect for them. But this boy resists arrest, this young man, and then he and his accomplice both launch an astonishingly violent attack upon the officers. One of them punches an officer over and over again, and you'll see it in the footage. The punches rain down on him, one after the other, on this officer, who eventually sort of slumps down to the floor. And then a female officer is punched in the side of her head, and a second female officer is smashed in the face so hard by one of these young men that her nose breaks. Then there are 4 further punches to the first female officer that was hit. She is pummeled until she loses consciousness for a brief moment. That is what the papers tell us, until she loses consciousness. Thankfully, she comes to quickly. But another male officer, who is preparing to taser one of the young men, is then attacked from behind by one of the others, who grabs his neck and punches him. And he has a suspected broken jaw now, this other officer. And then the first female officer who was attacked bravely finds her way to her taser, and that is the moment when she tasers the primary offender, and he is floored. And it is in that moment that he is floored when one of the officers who has just been attacked then comes, kicks him in the head, and, as they say in the press, stamps on that head. That officer has since been suspended by the GMP, the Greater Manchester Police, pending investigation, because that was the only segment that everybody had been shown, the young boy getting kicked in the head. And everybody went nuts because they didn't have the patience to wait. It was racism that, and cruelty that, and assassination attempt this. And there are already fears, by the way. You can guess, can't you? There are already fears that this poor officer, this hero officer, will have to go into hiding for life. Because this has already happened. There's been various teachers, but there was one particular teacher, was it Batley School, something, who had to go into hiding for the rest of his life and change his name because it was felt that he had insulted the Prophet Muhammad. They mob up and intimidate and insist upon laws that you'd find in some other far-flung religious state, not in Britain, not in Great Britain. And they did it at cinemas last year. I remember we talked about this. There was a cinema film that didn't meet their approval because they felt that it was blasphemous. And blasphemy is not illegal here in the kingdom, and never it should be, whether Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or the justified ages of Mumu. I don't care. Blasphemy is totally legal here, and people should be unafraid to speak their mind, mock whoever they please, within the confines of the law. But this poor teacher went into hiding, and then the cinemas that were running this movie got mobbed and threatened with closure. It's bullying, intimidation and bullying, totally unacceptable. And we saw that kind of behaviour in the schools mentioned in the Tommy Robinson documentary that I've brought to your attention before, which is called Silenced, and which was run in its full entirety at Tommy Robinson's Patriots March yesterday in London. Were any of you there? Let me know if you went. There were tens of thousands at this Patriot March. And it was a lot less violent than all the other sorts of marches we've had since October the 7th last year. A lot more peaceful. I think from what I know of, there were only 2 minor arrests out of a crowd of, some are saying 100,000. There was a huge show of support for Great Britain and for uniting the kingdom, as Tommy Robinson said. And I'm not in complete alignment with Tommy Robinson and everything that he says and believes, but what we saw could be a final yelp of a swan song for traditional British culture. But it's worthwhile anyway, because at least he is speaking about matters that are important to those of us who enjoy our traditional culture and way of life. But his documentary, Silence, which I'm sure you can find on his X account now or wherever on the internet, that's been clocking up millions of views in the past 24 hours. The last time I looked, there were 6 million views in less than a day. So it's being seen. It's being seen. And of course, Tommy Robinson, as of today, is being detained under the Terrorism Act. Yes. He said when he broadcast this documentary yesterday in Trafalgar Square, he said, I could end up doing 2 years in jail for showing you this, because the authorities shut it down. They wouldn't let him play it, but he went ahead and played it anyway, despite the risk of jail, and today he is being detained under the Terrorism Act. He, out of all the people in this kingdom, all the ne'er-do-wells, he is the one being detained under the Terrorism Act. This is the kind of clown world we are living in, my dears, the kind of perverse society we are living in. The landscape is being reformed in their image before our very eyes. And when I say their eyes, I'm talking about they who wish our culture and our communities harm and are hostile to our way of life and wish to impose their way of life upon us. I was reading just this morning about the potential sale of a Scottish island, the Isle of Torsa off the west coast of Scotland. There's a potential sale, it's in the advanced talks. I think it's going to be £3 or £4 million to buy this island, and it's being bought by a cleric who claimed asylum when he was escaping from Kuwait. He was fleeing Kuwait, this was 20 years ago, came here. Now he wants to build a school and a hospital and a mosque and intends to practice Sharia law on this island and make it into some sort of separate state, really. And these people are able to crowdfund enormous amounts. There are enormous reservoirs of cash at home and abroad from people who want to prop up this sort of thing. And it should be stamped out by the UK government. We should have a government that protects us from this, and that should have been protecting us for the last few decades. But instead they've been encouraging it all. And many of our institutions and governments have been and are being taken over by those who have the same desire anyway. That should all be stamped out, as should the gross and obscene behaviour of those young men at Manchester Airport. The gross and obscene behaviour. Now, could that officer have used an alternative type of force to steady the situation? Yes, he possibly could have. But do I care? No. No, I do not care. I could not give a rat's arse. I have no sympathy whatsoever. And let us not forget, that officer would have been dazed and confused after being pelted and bashed. And they were carrying firearms that the 2 young idiots could have got their hands on and brought harm to other people. So in that moment, perhaps he didn't make the most immaculate decision in the world. But Thankfully, I haven't had to walk a few steps in his policeman's boots, and I am prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt after seeing the footage of those hooligans, those animals, beating up men and women, smashing them in the face. These people who are just doing their job to protect we as the citizens of this country, smashing them in the face, breaking the nose of female police officers without a second thought, without a care, as if they run this kingdom. That officer is a hero, and he should be venerated. And many are voicing the same opinion. Many have made the point that in other lands, there are other nations where they would have been shot dead for that sort of behaviour. So, Rhea Salam, do you still feel so much sympathy for that poor man, as you described him, that poor man, so meek and mild and defenceless, and his cohort? Sadly, the answer is probably that yes, you probably still do, don't you? You probably still do. You are as vile as them. And it makes me feel queasy that you even watch my show. Scum! I am getting sick to death of various communities getting the whip hand over our institutions. Sick to death. I do appreciate that Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, urged people not to rush to judgment when the first piece of footage was released and people were going mad. He did try to simmer the situation down. But then today I see him interviewed after this further footage has been released, and it's lots of platitudes. Quit the platitudes appeasing these animals and their mobs and their mobsters and their rioters. We want decency. We want decency back. What are we hurtling towards as a society, as a nation? And as for Sonia Massey, who we previously discussed, the American lady who was shot dead 3 times to the face by an officer, I have now seen the fully available camera footage from that incident. Thank you to those of you who directed me to it, because I hadn't seen the full camera footage. I think now I have. And while there is some confusion with regards to the pan of hot water that she had in her hands, the fact is that the officer no doubt escalated that situation. I think most of us are in agreement there when she says, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. She says that, and he goes ballistic, doesn't he? He turns upon her, threatens her with the gun, and he just goes from 1 to 100. I don't know if he had some PTSD or some trauma that triggered him, but he wasn't in any danger whatsoever, despite the fact she had a pot of boiling water by the stove. He was several feet away from her. He was 3 times the size of her. He was fully clothed. He could have escaped any bit of water she managed to get over him. And by that time anyway, she was cowering on the floor. She cowered as soon as he brandished the gun. She hit the floor. Yes, she took the pan with her. Some say she chucked it at him. You can get a glimpse of her kind of throwing it in the air, but it's hard to try and second guess exactly what she was trying to do with it. She was in fear for her life. But there was the barrier of the kitchen bar between her and the officer. For a start, there was no reason under the sun for him to then go ahead and shoot her 3 times in the face, as he did. And even if he had considered himself to be in genuine peril and fear for his life, he could have used a taser. Presumably he had one of them. There is any number of things that he could have done in that situation other than kill her. Any number of things he could have done. But as Lillian Arch said, you are absolutely correct about the systemic failure in recruitment and training. Yes, that is where the failure lies, my dear. How these bad apples can get through the system. Well, one of the famous sayings here in the kingdom is, mustn't grumble, mustn't grumble. But we must. We must sometimes, mustn't we, my dear? We've got to get it out of our system some way, haven't we, my dears? And many of you tell me that you can do it vicariously through me. So that's my excuse for having a good old grumble, my dears. But thank you for indulging my rant and my ramble. I look forward to ranting and rambling with you again very soon. Thank you for joining me. Stay fruity and always on royal duty. Doodle pip.